I'm Amy Haugland.
I'm Alex Haugland.
And this is our 1972 Datsun 240Z.
Hallelujah, hey, Jubilee. I got a feeling and it's moving to my feet. Take a picture, would you look at me now? I'm stepping outside so that everyone can see. Watch out, it's a brand new me. Yeah, it's a brand new me.
Datsun began life building Japanese market versions of British cars in the 1930s, continuing in that tradition after World War II. When the parent company Nissan decided to enter the US market in the 1960s, they chose to use the Datsun name as it was not associated with the material support that Nissan had provided the Japanese military in World War II.
The Datsun 240Z came out in 1969 as Nissan's grand touring car in a market dominated by British and Italian sports cars. Datsun was already selling sporty open-top roadsters in the US market, but sales weren't as competitive with the established British and Italian offerings. Its elegant design, nimble handling, strong inline six-cylinder engine, affordable price, and above all, incredible reliability allowed it not only to define a market segment for Japanese sports cars in the United States, but to also herald the end of many of the European brands that had previously controlled that market.
Thus, the same car, which was sold as a Nissan in Japan, was sold as a Datsun in the United States.
As typical of Japanese cars, the 240Z and its successors received continual improvements and refinements throughout production. The car was hugely successful and had continued to inspire an ongoing family of Z cars for Nissan, with 6 more generations of cars following the original design. Needless to say, it sold incredibly well, with over 164,000 240Zs alone. Thus, they completely dominated over the likes of MG, Triumph, and Fiat, all of which pulled out of the US market within 3 years of the end of the first series of Z cars. Welcome to this episode of Everyday to Exotic. Join us as we share some of the unique vehicles in our diverse collection of exotic and everyday cars.
Driving each car provides a different experience, each with their individual strengths and weaknesses.
We'll take you through those characteristics together, both up close in the studio and while driving them on the beautiful roads of Oregon.
Finally, we'll individually award points for each episode's car to determine where it ranks in the Haugland Collection.
We're glad you're here for this episode of Everyday to Exotic.
Oh, do you want me to put my arms out?
I'm just doing it partly because that way I'm not just going, I'm standing here.
Gesturing.
Gesturing is good.
The Datsun 240Z borrows a lot of elements from the Jaguar E-Type, from the long, swooping hood with its power bulge, up over the top to the cut-off camtail, the back.
So the first few years of the Datsun 240Z had vents actually in the rear hatch. What those vents did is that they allowed air, theoretically, to come through the car when the windows are down and escape out the back. The problem was they also happened to let exhaust fumes come into the car and smelled absolutely horrible. So in order to fix that, they redesigned the car slightly, and they put vents in the side pillars here and put these little emblems over the top of the hole to kind of hide that it's there. And so that changed on both sides.
I love the redesigned emblem with the little Z. It's very aesthetically pleasing.
So one part of the chrome trim on this car that is not actually original was dealer installed. You see them on almost every car out of the 1970s that they would basically sell to people as an upgrade in order to protect the car from door dings, from people just slamming their door into the side of it. And so it's a little rubber strip in an aluminum molding with caps. Many cars ended up getting them installed, even into the 80s. The downside with it is to install them, you're drilling holes through the nicely painted body of the car. Sometimes they lead to rust, sometimes they lead to other issues. When you restore the car, you now have these holes to fill, and the rubber on these weirdly tends to shrink on a lot of cars. And so you'll frequently have little gaps at the beginning and end or whatever as they get fitted. So this car, they look fairly good. They were on there from the beginning. I'm gonna leave them there.
Another thing that's aesthetically pleasing is these headlights, how they're inset, which is also very similar to the way that the Jaguar E-Type was. A lot of people will now get covers and put them on over the top, which was how the original E-Types were. Unfortunately, in 1972, those kinds of headlight covers were illegal, so those don't come stock.
So the wheels on this car are actually the original steel wheels with the correct 1972 era hubcaps. You tend not to see that often at this point. Most people have swapped these out to alloy wheels, get a bigger range of tire sizes, things like that. But this is actually how these cars came. So another thing on this is that this being a 1972, it was before a lot of the bumper regulations came in. And you'll see on the later generations of these cars, these beautiful chrome bumpers are gone, replaced with these giant bumpers that stick out like park benches in order to meet 5-mile-an-hour crash safety standards at the time.
It's very, very sad. You don't
stick out like park benches.
They do. If you look at
my
the 280, it's like this. I could sit on the bumpers.
From the front of the car. I do like it's very, very sad though. That should be in there.
Well, it is very sad. Here we are at the aforementioned camtail. Notice the gorgeous bumpers back here as well. This back was always black. Didn't matter what color the rest of your car was. This is black.
So other features you'll see back here is the factory installed power antenna. The rear hatch opens simply with a push button and lifts. Holds itself up with a good shock. The shocks eventually fail, you replace them, then it stays up again. Otherwise, you have a golf club back here or something that you just jam in to hold it up, like everyone else does. So the storage space in here is actually fairly good for the most part. You've got a nice open compartment in the front here. The only real downside is the suspension design on this is a Chapman strut, which requires that the top of the shock be mounted pretty high up into the car in order to make it operate properly. It's nice and light and a good suspension system, but what it means is that you have these tall towers in the back that somewhat limit your cargo space. One of the big advantages of it, however, is that potentially you could have things where it's like if you have a large object here, it keeps things from going forward and running into you if you have to stop suddenly.
You'll notice that the aesthetically pleasing front upholstery continues all the way through the back. They didn't skimp at all, including wrapping the strut towers with the really lovely patterned vinyl. That's original.
And now on to the engine bay. So nothing in here at all would surprise a British mechanic in a lot of ways. This definitely reveals a lot of the character of what would have been the origins of Datsun's copies of British cars. So you've got an inline 6-cylinder engine. It is a pretty nice engine overall, but kind of similar layout to what you would typically find on most British inline 6s. You do have 2 Japanese copies of SU carburetors feeding it. That is a copy of the standard carburetor that was on almost every British car from like the 1920s up. So very, very standard layout here. Where you get some changes, however, is that instead of this being a pushrod motor like what was in the contemporary Triumph TR6, it's actually an overhead cam engine. And so that is really an example of Datsun taking a design that they've been building for years and improving it, and iteratively improving it, making them better and better and better. Other interesting features you'll find in the engine bay is the fact that on both sides you have flaps like this. This side, it gives you good access to your battery. On the other side, it gives you access to your washer bottle and your clutch reservoir. This engine has a mechanical fuel pump, which operates here directly off the top of the head, so it's running off the cam drive. And the thing I tend not to like about some of these cars is the mechanical fuel pump. Because I have so many cars and drive them, if they sit, it takes a while to reprime the system. This one doesn't seem too bad, but I prefer a mechanical fuel pump that also has a little manual lever that you can usually operate in order to basically prime it by hand rather than cranking the engine over. This still primes pretty well on its own, so I'm not going to worry about it that much. Another rather cool feature actually in the engine bay of most of these cars actually is the little trouble light that's built in. It has a nice little switch on the back, lights up, theoretically illuminates the generally most useless side of the engine. Here I have access to spark plugs and can see that and see the oil filter, but not really much else that I typically would be dealing with. However, it was designed so that you could pull it out, and when it's not shorting itself out randomly, it will light up. And if your cord were long enough, you could probably even hang it off of the hood so you could actually see in here if you had to work on the side of the road at night. As is, mine has a tendency to act up a little bit, as you can tell, and it's all in the wiring down here in the light itself. So I'll turn it off and put it back. It'll keep you from getting stranded on the side of the road, except it'll leave you stranded on the side of the road when you're trying to count on it.
Yeah.
Most car manufacturers tend to put their name on the engine itself somewhere. You'll see Lamborghini on Lamborghini engines. You'll see Ferrari all over Ferrari engines. In this case, because of the fact that everywhere else in the world this is a Nissan, it says Nissan OHC, overhead cam. It's one of the few places that you obviously see the Nissan origins in this car rather than necessarily Datsun. So on this side of the car, we have our brake master, which is boosted, and it's 2 circuits, as I believe was required by the law by 1972. Front brakes on this are disc, rear brakes are drums, pretty common for sports cars at this time. Same thing as what was on an MGB, things like that. A few of the higher end cars were 4-wheel discs, but a lot of them were actually just disc and drum. Under here you could also see our washer reservoir and our clutch master.
And here we are in the interior. This is one of our favorite color combinations. White exterior with the red and sometimes a little bit of black interior. The materials in here are vinyl and plastic for the most part. This is how you know we're in the 1970s. It's moving away from the 1960s leather and wood and vinyl. The steering wheel, however, is still wood. This was incredibly popular up through the 1970s and into the 80s, especially in sports cars. So these are the original vinyl seats. They're still in really good shape for the most part. You know, a few little flaws, but because they're vinyl, which doesn't breathe the way that leather does, if you get air in there, it's not going to come out. So this has these little vents here and here and here and here, so that if you do get air in the seats and you lean back, you're leaning against the padding of the seat and not against an airbag. The gauges are nice and big, easy to read, and unlike many of our British cars, we have a clock that actually works. The climate controls and the original factory radio are all right in the middle, which makes them really easy to access for both the driver and the passenger. So they could lead to some arguments there. They don't with us. The climate control works really well. In the 1970s, they started having stronger fans, and none of that haunted air conditioning. And so this is a really good car in almost any kind of weather. You don't want to drive it in the snow, but otherwise you're good. One of the really convenient and interesting features of this car is the everything switch, which you have over here. It has your headlights, it has your wipers, it has your windshield washer. The only problem is that if one thing goes wrong in that everything switch, everything has gone wrong. Here's the ashtray, standard issue in the 1970s. Pretty much everybody smoked. Of course, later on, we wound up with this is where you keep your change, back when we all carried cash. Nowadays, perfectly fits a can of soda. We use it as an impromptu cup holder because you really don't have cup holders in these cars. Visibility in this car is excellent. We have fairly small blind spots. I like that I can pull the seat far enough forward to reach the pedals and still be in a comfortable driving position. That's not always possible for me. The seat belts are unique, and I mean that in the least affectionate way possible. They have a bit where you can remove the shoulder belt and just have a lap belt. It adjusts both across the lap and here, but not very well. And once you get it adjusted for you, if you're the only person driving this car, it's awesome, it's excellent. If you want to switch drivers, it is a pain in the backside. One of the things that I love about this interior is you will never forget that you are driving a Datsun 240Z. Datsun here, the floor mats say 240Z, the pedals say Datsun. There's little Z's everywhere. You've got your Z on your seat belt. Got our glove box. Again, we're reminded it's a Datsun 240Z. Did we mention that? It just opens like that. It's basically a cardboard box inside. But you can lock it if you want to. We have a lot of cars in our collection. Overall, this is one of my favorites, both to sit in and to look at. This is the Datsun 240Z. For me, this was love at first drive. I got in the seat, started her up, and it felt like this was a car that wanted to go play with me.
In a lot of ways, this really is a fantastic little sports car. I mean, it's not the fastest that we have. It's not the most sporty sports car. It's not necessarily something most people are going to identify as being a high-performance car to the same extent as some of the others. But, I mean, you can really see why this dominated the market in the 70s. I mean, it was such a good, basic, usable car that happens to also be able to comfortably go 120 miles an hour.
It's very responsive. The accelerator is quite responsive, so you do have to be a little careful.
And I'm a huge fan of straight six engines. I mean, most of our higher performance cars from Europe are straight sixes. There's a few V8s and things, and V12s, but all a V12 is two straight sixes stuck together, so it's the best of both worlds. But straight sixes tend to have lots of torque at the bottom end. They have very linear acceleration. They're smooth. They run beautifully.
Also, nice light clutch, which I like because it's easier for people like me with small weenie muscles to deal with.
So, I mean, this car originally was an automatic, so we put in the 5-speed manual, which I think is a really good fit. If this were a manual car originally, it would have been a 4-speed. The advantage of a 5-speed over the 4-speed is that the 5-speed actually matches the final drive ratio in the rear end that the automatic had. So actually it meant that we put it in, the speedometer and all that worked just right out of the box. We didn't have to change anything on that end. Everything stayed working just the way it should. So it was a pretty easy install. And the way that they designed these cars, there was even a place to hang the clutch pedal and install all the hydraulics. So it was very, very easy to do. I think part of what I like about this is in many ways it also feels like a British car. I mean, again, you've got sort of that very British style engine and everything. It's to the point where it has SU carburetors and it behaves like a British car. It starts like a British car. The choke works like a British car. It really tends to behave that same way. But then, unlike most British cars of the 1970s, it was reliable.
And it wasn't very expensive to get the car worked on. It wasn't like a,
It's not a Ferrari.
It's not a Ferrari.
Or a Porsche or BMW or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a sports car, but it's not a luxury sports car.
Yeah. The other thing is that the Japanese have always been very good at iterative improvement. It's like take a design and make it better, one little bit at a time. What they did is they took British cars. And they were decent cars at the time in the 1950s. And the Japanese basically took that design and made it better and better and better.
I mean, this is the kind of car that I feel like I could just, I'm going out for the day, I need to run a couple of errands, and I want to have fun while I'm doing it. I could just get in it and go. I don't have to do anything special to it. It's not precious at all. It's just you turn the key and it's ready.
Kind of helps that it's a car that a lot of people know and have seen. You tend to get a lot of thumbs up in this.
But you don't get the, oh my gosh, what's that? As much. People know what it is.
Yeah.
But there are people who will stop you and go, oh, I used to have a 240Z. It was really awesome. Here are some of the memories I have of it. That's another one that the stories tend to end with, I never should have sold that car. What a beautiful drive. And now it's time for the Haugland Score.
Here's how it works.
Alex and I have individually rated the car in 5 categories, each with a rank of 0 to 10. Then we add our scores together to give us the final Haugland Score.
After we combine our scores, the results go up on the board. So starting with performance, I gave the car an 8. It handles well, it drives very neutrally, the suspension's great. It really fits in sort of the idea of what some people call it as a poor man's E-Type. It has a lot of the characteristics that make an E-Type a great car as well, but in an affordable package and something I can drive every day.
I also gave it an 8 for very similar reasons. I found this a very easy car to drive because it was so responsive to everything that I asked. For style, I also gave it an 8. It feels elegant, but it's also really fun.
And I gave it a 7. I like the styling of the car. It's pretty nice, but in a lot of ways it's also kind of derivative. It's like some of the other cars that came out of Britain before it. It doesn't necessarily stand out as being something revolutionary in design. So drivability, it's actually to me one of the most important things on any car is how often can I use it, how comfortably can I drive this anytime, anywhere for whatever I want to do. I gave this car a 9 because this is easily a car I could see basically having as your only car, not just your only sports car, not just your only classic, but I could see it still being even your only car. I'd say the only downside is the classic problem with any kind of hatchback car like this in many ways is I can't put something in the trunk and not have it visible. Otherwise, it's an absolutely wonderful car as long as you don't need to seat like 5 people in it.
That's really interesting because I gave it a 7, and my reasoning is very similar because the clutch is really easy, it's fun to drive, I wouldn't worry too much about where I parked it, but I wouldn't take this on multiple errands, for instance, and I probably wouldn't take it grocery shopping. And it's also not at all climate controlled back there, so you don't want to leave things in the sun, for instance. For significance, I gave it an 8. It's a fairly significant car in the American sports car market, as in it's directly responsible for the loss of popularity for British and Italian cars at the time. It's also a fairly significant car in our collection in that we don't have very many Japanese cars.
I also gave it an 8, and it's sort of a melancholy score in many ways because of the fact that it really does spell the end of a lot of the other cars that I love in our collection. It would have been interesting to see what those companies would have done in the 80s and things if they'd have continued in the US market, especially with most of the American cars being, frankly, kind of boring. It also really launched the Japanese sports car, period. So not just for Datsun, but for Mazda, for others as well coming after. Finally, for delight, I gave it a 6. A lot of people enjoy the Datsun, a lot of people have stories with them. At the same time, I don't think they inspire the awe that some of the other cars tend to do. It's not the, ooh, there's a Datsun, as much as, ooh, there's a Ferrari, or what the heck is that? So that to me is usually a huge part of what inspires more delight.
And I gave it a 7 for similar reasons. You get a lot of positive acknowledgement, but it's not the, ooh, However, I love it. So it gets more points from me as I smile every time I look at it, and I absolutely love the driving experience.
So, adding everything together, that brings us to a total of 76 for 1972 Datsun 240Z.
76 feels like a really good score for this car. This has definitely been my favorite car in our collection to drive so far.
There are quite a few good cars, though, that we have yet to get to. I think there are also quite a few much worse cars to get to, but we'll have fun with those too.
Definitely.
Thank you for watching this episode of Every Day to Exotic.
Our goal is to create a show that's as much fun for you to watch as it is for us to make.
So please comment. Let us know what you liked and what you'd like to see.
Don't forget to subscribe. We're creating new content all the time, and we're looking forward to bringing it to you. You'll want to be among the first to know.
And if you have friends who you think would enjoy this, please go ahead and share it with them.
Don't forget to like.
And if you want to see what else is going on with the Haugland Collection, follow us on Instagram at Haugland Collection. We'll see you on the next episode of Every Day to Exotic.
Okay, see you later. Bye.
You're not gonna miss me. I guess I'll get along somehow. Like a fish goes for the water, like the birds for the skies above. That's the way I go for you, pretty little girl, and I like your kind of love. Yes, I like your kind of